Excellencies, distinguished delegates, a warm welcome to the second day of the Asia-Pacific Regional Review of Implementation of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. If you could kindly take your seats, the meeting will commence very shortly. Thank you.
A very good morning to all distinguished delegates. I trust you have great rest and enjoy Bangkok as well. And welcome back to the second Asia Pacific Regional Review of the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. The meeting is called to order. I now invite the meeting to consider Agenda Item 3, thematic discussions on progress and challenges with regard to implementing the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration at all levels, with due respect to its cross-cutting and interdependent guiding principles. The documents pertaining to this agenda item are ESCAP/GCM/2025/2 and ESCAP/GCM/2025/3 and ESCAP/GCM/2025/4. To inform the deliberation of this agenda item, we will have thematic discussions on the achievements, challenges, gaps, and emerging issues related to the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration in Asia Pacific. These thematic discussions will also inform the chair's summary, and each thematic discussion will feature a roundtable discussion to introduce the topic. So following each panel and time permitting, there will be a few minutes of Q&A for short questions and remarks for the panel, and then the moderator will conclude the panel discussion, and I will open the floor for statements. So all delegations are requested to stick to the 3-minute time limit for all statements under Agenda Item 3. Since we have received many speaking requests, I believe, and time permitting, I will only call on stakeholders that have not yet spoken. We will also post a longer statement on the website of the meeting. And at the end of the fourth roundtable this afternoon, we will consider the draft decisions contained in documents ESCAP/GCM/2025/2 and ESCAP/GCM/2025/3. We will now first take up Agenda Item 3A, ensuring that migration is voluntary, safe, orderly, and regular, and addressing objectives 2, 5, 6, 12, and 18. The first roundtable discussion will be moderated by Ms. Panuda Bonpala, already here with me, Deputy Regional Director, ILO Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. And may I please ask the moderator and the panelists of the first roundtable discussion for this morning to take their seats in the sofa chair. Ms. Bonpala, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairperson, distinguished delegates, stakeholder representative, UN colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the UN Network on Migration, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to the first roundtable of the second Asia-Pacific Regional Review of the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration, ensuring that migration is voluntary, regular, and orderly. Allow me to recap the GCM objective under review in this roundtable. Objective 2 seeks to minimize the adverse drivers that compel people to live in unsafe or disorderly ways. Objective 5 aims to increase the availability and effectiveness of legal pathways for migration. Objective 6 focuses on ensuring fair recruitment and decent working conditions. Objective 12 is concerned with strengthening the predictability in migration procedures, and Objective 18 promotes skills development and recognition. The purpose of this roundtable is to hear from member states and stakeholders their experiences and views around this objective of the GCM, in particular to take stock of the progress of the implementation since the first regional review and to discuss ways forward. The centrality of work to migration flows in the region is clear. At the same time, there are other critical flows in the region, including that of migrants moving in response to impacts of climate change and environmental degradation. Access to employment opportunities, fair recruitment and safe working conditions, social protection, freedom of association, and social dialogue are foundations of decent work, paving the way to social justice. In this roundtable, we have three distinguished panelists. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Timothy Breyer, Program Advisor, Climate Mobility from PIF, Pacific Island Forum, from Secretariat in Fiji. Ms. Ip Puyu, Regional Coordinator, International Domestic Workers Federation, or IDWF, from Hong Kong. Mr. Ajit Polawate, Director, Deputy Director General, Territory Vocational Education Commission, Ministry of Education, Higher Education, and Vocational Education from Sri Lanka. So we will kickstart with the first panelist. First, I'll ask our panelist, Mr. Timothy Breyer. Could you please share the experience in developing the Pacific Framework on Climate Mobility, implementation progress, and also upcoming plans? And how can the GCM and the regional institution or processes support regional and national efforts in building climate resilience in the Pacific Island states? The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here with you today. Before I begin, I just wish to thank the ILO for enabling me to be here on behalf of the Pacific Island Forum to talk about the Climate Mobility Framework, and also wish to acknowledge the forum member countries that spoke yesterday, for whom I'm just a mere civil servant. The Pacific Island Framework was endorsed at the 52nd Pacific Island Forum Leaders Meeting in 2023 to ensure rights-based and people-centered movement in the context of climate change. And what I want to talk about today is two things. Firstly, just some of the success ingredients that led to the development of the framework that might be a recipe for others to replicate, as well as some of the, I guess, situating it in the global and regional challenges that we face in implementing the framework. Firstly, the Pacific Regional Framework is a demonstration of regional collective leadership at the highest level. In adopting the framework, forum leaders stressed the need for solidarity and committed to working together to address climate mobility. Second, the framework is built upon inclusivity and participation. And here I wish to give a shout out to all the Pacific Island civil society and private sector participants who are sitting over there and are joining us this week. As a result of extensive consultation across the Pacific region with government officials, civil society, private sector, as well as regional and international organizations, the framework is a robust document that has the buy-in of Pacific Island governments and key stakeholders across the region. And finally, the framework is an example, a really good example, I think, of interagency collaboration for the benefit of member states. And on this note, I wish to thank our partners from the Pacific Climate Change Mobility and Human Security Program, who provide enduring and genuine partnerships in supporting our member countries, and specifically the ILO, IOM, ESCAP, the UN Human Rights Office, and the Platform for Disaster Displacement. Excellencies, the framework is an example of translating the GCM into our regional context. It seeks to address climate mobility in a way that is not only rights-based and people-centered, but also aims to protect and uphold the cultural traditions, self-determination, and statehood of Pacific Island nations. And this brings me to an important point. While the framework supports different forms of mobility, including planned relocation, displacement, and migration, forum leaders nonetheless stress that enabling people to stay in their homes is paramount. In this regard, Objective 2 of the GCM is a priority for the Pacific. That is, efforts to minimize the adverse drivers and structural factors. You all know this better than me, sorry, I'm changing pages. That compel people to leave their homes. In the Pacific, these factors not only include our vulnerabilities to climate change and disasters, but also economic vulnerabilities and dependencies. Therefore, investments in resilient development at the local and national level are of crucial importance to the Pacific. Towards this end, forum leaders are establishing the Pacific Resilience Facility, which aims to ensure that climate and disaster risk finance is easily accessible and readily available to Pacific communities who are on the front lines of climate change. Furthermore, Pacific Island people now have many avenues for migration, both short-term labour mobility and longer-term or more permanent migration. The labour mobility principles, which the delegate from Tuvalu mentioned yesterday, that are being developed by PIFS and the ILO, are important in ensuring predictability and certainty for Pacific migrants. However, while such opportunities are crucial for enabling adaptation to the impacts of climate change, we must also be aware of the way they impact the drivers and structural factors that compel people to move. Indeed, the Honourable Minister from Fiji yesterday raised the issue of the drain of skilled workers from his country. And in this respect, the Forum Economic Ministers have commissioned the Secretariat to analyse the impact of outward migration on the economies of small island Pacific states, including the social impacts and the impacts on resilient development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I've spoken about our vulnerabilities, but I wish to conclude on a different note. As the Pacific begins to implement the climate mobility framework, I wish to stress that as a region, we have a rich foundation of skills, knowledge, and leadership upon which to address the challenge of climate mobility. And therefore, this foundation should be the basis for supporting regional and national efforts in building climate resilience in the Pacific. Moderator, thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Breyer, for sharing your very valuable insights on the Pacific framework on climate mobility and the role of regional efforts in building climate resilience in the Pacific Island states. We heard loud and clear the strong collective leadership that you have mentioned, but also very broad-based participation across the board. Thank you very much. Now let me move to our second panelist, Ms. Ip Puyu. It has been recognized that domestic work is an integral part of the care economy. What are some promising areas of progress in achieving protection and rights for migrant domestic workers in our region? And also, how important are the two R's, the reward and recognition for migrant domestic workers? The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Pumbala. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Thanks for the question, especially that is highlighting care economy that has been an increased concern in recent years, as well as what we have heard from quite many of you, the member states, mentioning about the care economy. Indeed, the care crisis is a global phenomenon, first on the pressing needs regionally and globally for care workforce, as well as secondly, on the decent deficits faced by workers providing care, especially migrant domestic workers. The ILO International Labour Organization has a 5R framework for decent care work: recognize, reduce, we distribute unpaid care work, and reward and representation. And this 5R framework provides key principle checklists for governments and stakeholders on how we address care crisis. For our discussion on global compact on migration, it is essential that rights to be achieved for migrant domestic workers in the discussion of care economy. I can recall in the last GCM review and the IMRF, it was during the COVID-19 pandemic. Migrant workers are recognized in the Progress Declaration as essential workers. However, it has been also at the same time expressed by the member states a deep concern that the pandemic has had a severe and disproportionate impact on migrants, especially increased COVID-19 exposure, discrimination, violence, job losses, wage theft, protracted family separation, and restricted or lack of access to healthcare services and other basic services and rights. So it was a time migrants and migrant domestic workers organized themselves. Many collaborated with their governments on access to food and vaccines, on access to justice when they are exploited in the pandemic. It was a time, a crisis, that shows strong and willpower of migrant labor to be organized and how governments experience the important role of these migrants, communities, organizations, unions. Despite that, freedom of association for migrants and migrant domestic workers are often denied in the labor law in the region. So it is through the tireless effort of migrant domestic workers in organizing that we have seen several achievements by them to gain rights for migrant domestic workers in the region. And we have witnessed increased recognition by the governments and other stakeholders appreciating their organizing efforts and their union roles. When I say increase, it doesn't mean full recognition of their representation yet, no, but it's recognition of their raising of their issues, especially how they organize themselves to provide evidence-based research and data. A few states and economies, because of this, in the region, have revised many laws and policies, especially on social protection in recent years, to include migrant domestic workers in the countries of destination, as well as by the countries of origin to extend the social protection laws to the migrant domestic workers abroad. We have seen that in Malaysia and Thailand, for example. And as I said, a few countries of origins have revised its social protection policies to extend its inclusions of migrant domestic workers working abroad. There has been strong interest on this, on the portability of social protection for migrant domestic workers. However, the wages of migrant domestic workers remain a stumbling block for this because their wages are still far too low for them to contribute to the social protection schemes. The discussion and social dialogues between migrant domestic workers, organizations, unions, governments, and other stakeholders are going on, and these evidence-based researches by migrant domestic workers themselves have been welcomed by the governments. And when government data on basic information and conditions of migrant domestic workers remain as a serious concern. So I would like to call for an attention by the member states and stakeholders here on the gap, especially on decent work deficit in the care economy. We would like to call for reward, reasonable, justified reward for migrant domestic workers and recognition of their skills and representation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Fish, for really highlighting the progress in achieving rights for migrant domestic workers in Asia Pacific region, and also emphasizing pending deficits that needs more work in progress. Thank you so much. So now let me turn to our last panelist, Mr. Ajit Polawate. How will the South Asian qualification framework benefit women and men, migrant workers, and employers? How will the framework advance the GCM implementation? So please share the experience of Sri Lanka's national skills passport with us. Thank you. Over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Pin. Excellencies, distinguished invitees of the conference. Let me take the first part of your question, which is regarding South Asian qualification framework. It is a referencing framework, not a qualification framework. The purpose of the referencing framework is to help recognize and understand qualifications of a person issued by member states in formal manner. It benefits migrants to prove their level of qualifications and what they are able to do at work. It benefits employers to understand the qualifications and certificates rendered by a migrant worker. As the migrant workers' interests are looked after by the referencing framework, it ensures migrants' safety in a destination country. Also, it helps academia to offer training courses at next higher level for those who wish to pursue further education and training. Many countries in the South Asian region implement qualification frameworks, where Sri Lanka National Vocational Qualification Framework award vocational qualifications in certificate, diploma, and higher national diploma levels. So now let me go to the second part of your question that relates with the National Skills Passport, which Sri Lanka introduced recently, is now very popular among NVQ holders with work experiences. It also developed conjointly by 3 parties, the Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission, that is the regulatory body of Tibet in Sri Lanka, the ILO, and the Employers Federation of Ceylon, that is union's office. It was developed. Skills Passport is a digital information repository of a person's certified qualifications and work experiences. It also developed benchmarking Europass, where the skill passport holder can generate CVs by getting information from the repository. Employers can rely on this information as those information are previously verified by the issuing authority, that is the Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission. Skill passport holder can update his information in contact with the issuing authority, that is Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission. Those migrants who return to country after serving some time in a destination country for more than 4 years can obtain skill passport with a skill assessment at NVQ level 4 done through recognition of prior learning pathway of the NVQ system. With the migrant worker go back to overseas, the skill passport is immensely useful. Mostly they get higher salaries and improved terms of employment because the person's qualifications and experiences are verified by the authority. It is issued with a QR code where an employer can scan the QR, and in a flash, the employer can see the details on the migrant worker on the web. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is really very interesting and very practical approach that you have shared with us. And clearly it shows the benefits of having this recognition of prior learning and having skill passport. Thank you very much. So participants, now we will have some time, around 10-12 minutes or so, to give the floor to participants to ask any particular questions that you wish to raise to our panelists. As the chairperson said, this is not yet the time for statement, but really specific question that you wish to raise to the 3 panelists this morning. May I see who would like to raise a question? I see the Philippines. Yes, the Philippines, please go ahead. You take the floor. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, Excellencies. First of all, I would like to thank all the panelists for giving that very productive, very interesting topic. We learned a lot discussing those different topics. I would like to center my comment more of a comment, but I also have a question as regards the issue of domestic workers. And first of all, I'd like to thank our friend from Hong Kong for raising the issues of our domestic workers. We have, if I'm not mistaken, around 200,000 domestic workers in Hong Kong. The Philippines is a labor sending country, and we totally agree that the household service workers are, in a way, the contributions that they give to several economies are perhaps not given enough value. And for that purpose, we agree, and we would like to commend you for raising those points, which we equally share. My focus of my comment and also a question would be on the financial compensation. In the case of the Philippines, despite the different stringent protective mechanisms that we have instituted to protect domestic workers, we are still encountering those issues on a daily basis. On the issue of financial compensation, the last time that we have increased the salary is in 2006. We would like to know if there are studies that you have conducted in your organization as to what is a decent salary or a wage to be given to domestic workers, if any. Because from our side, definitely we agree that it is high time that we have to increase the compensation for domestic workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I see Japan would like to take the floor. Please, Japan.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you very much for raising this very important issue, the care worker and domestic worker and the level of work and skill and so on and so forth. I think this is very important. For your information, in Japan we have started to receive many foreign care workers, but they never work at home, individual home. They are only in the long-term care facility with the certain persons who can advise them, who can guide them. So, for example, in Taiwan, they have many foreign care workers at home, but there is a certain mechanism to control the quality of work and then their working condition. And then also, when we talk about, for example, 10 years ago, I talked with one of the Asian country persons that what about the care in your country? And they said, no, we have the domestic worker who can do the long-term care for the older person. And then 5 years later, I talked with the same country person. They are saying that, well, we have no more surplus of this abundance of worker. So in all Asian countries, lower in fertility and working population is becoming smaller. So I think that not only depending on the care worker who just come and they work irregularly, maybe as Asian-wide we have to structure the way the care is delivered to the babies or to the older persons. So I think this kind of discussion of the care work and the skill requirement and what kind of education, what kind of training, this is one of the very important things I would like to suggest. And then the other thing for domestic worker. For domestic worker in Japan, we cannot have foreign domestic worker because there is no visa for that. But because of that, the father and mother, the woman and man are busy. So what they do, we just almost many houses right now using robot to clean the room and so on and so forth. So we cannot always depend on this many cheap labor coming inside. And then the migrant work can be also considered as the quality of the skills. And then also we have to think about how to mix with new technologies, IT and robots and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is the Maldives, please. You have the floor. Thank you.
I have just a question for the last panelist from Sri Lanka. I wonder the skills recognition framework that he was talking about is related to the national qualifications framework or just a separate document for only recognizing the skills?
Okay, thank you. I think we take these first three. Now I ask Fish first to comment, and then Mr. Palawate, and then Mr. Timote. You also can comment. Go ahead, Fish, please.
Thank you so much for the questions. I can really feel the pressing concern and interest on the topic of care economy and migrant domestic workers. I really appreciate that. First of all, I'd like to highlight that in the region, we are really depending and relying more and more migrant domestic workers, but as a cheap labor, unfortunately. So what we mean by that in the sense that they are being discriminated in the wage level, as well as the recognition of their skills, as well as how they are not being enjoying equal rights, same with other kind of workers. It has been mentioned in the International Labour Convention 189 Decent Work for Domestic Workers that domestic workers are workers, domestic work is work. What does it mean? Not only they are workers, but they should enjoy equal rights with other workers. They should not be discriminated. So the issue is really about on the issues of the financial issue. I can see the migrant domestic workers in the past, not only 1 decade, actually in 3 decades. If you count the inflation and also the expenditure of them, they actually have real wage decrease. I think this is something that the region has to have a concern. Our affiliates have made studies, and despite they have been exploited on their wages, but also adding to that, they are being abused by the recruitment agencies. We have been facing exorbitant recruitment and related fees. So we do need policies and laws that ensure domestic workers are included in the labor framework, labor law framework in the countries of destination. And also the immigration laws should not restrict them to access their justice, because very often in the region, their visa are tied to the employer. So even if if I'm exploited, dismissed, and then I'm losing my permit to stay in order to pursue our cases. So this is something that we need multilateral cooperation on the issues of the wage level. The C189 has provided a clear framework and guidelines on the principles. And then on the skills is in the region, actually, we really do not see domestic workers as skilled labor. So they are skilled labor. Imagine how much household chores you have to take care of, and the care needs and the care issues that you have to be doing, babies and elderly. Yeah, I really look forward to a qualification framework recognizing domestic work as care and skilled labor, and also involving the migrant domestic workers, organizations and unions in the discussion on the skill recognition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Polawate, you can comment. Go
Thank
ahead.
you. It's a very good question you asked. In Sri Lanka, we have a national vocational qualification framework with 7 levels of competencies. And another framework we have called Sri Lanka Qualification Framework for the higher education sector. So NVQ framework is there in the country over the last 20 years, 2 decades, since 2004, which has now captured a vast majority of young people as well as experienced people to get qualifications. So skill passport is linked to the NVQ system only. The domestic workers who are coming back as well as who are willing to migrate can obtain qualifications. So this actually, so we are not calling them domestic workers, we call them housekeeping assistants. We have changed their title as well to increase the dignity of the migrants. So to get the skill passport, they need to get NVQ qualification first and then add the experience to the repository. So just scan in this QR or just input in the national identity card number. Anyone can log into this repository and see the details. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Breyer, you would like to add any comments? Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. Labour mobility is not my area of expertise, but certainly the stories resonate with the experiences of the Pacific as well. We're just starting to learn more now about the impacts of labor mobility on the workers who are migrating in terms of their rights and their wages, and also the impacts that it's having on their families back home. I was talking with this fish earlier about the impact on children, for example, when one or both parents migrate. So we're beginning to learn more. It's, as I kind of alluded to in my presentation, it's a catch-22 because we need the migration to help as an adaptation strategy, but at the same time, we need to be aware of the social, economic, and human impacts on those who are left behind.
Thank you. I am wondering if any other member states would like to raise question. Over there, I cannot see very well. Can Indonesia please take the floor? Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning to all of us. Thank you, panelists, for the wonderful explanation. I wish to echo what Ms. Puyu has already stated, that domestic worker, our migrant worker working on domestic sector, apparently living outside the protection of the labor law for the destination countries. In this regard, I wish to see actually that perhaps the GCM can provide a template for decent work standard contract, as we are actually trying very hard to push onward through the bilateral agreement with the destination countries, and Indonesia is one of the country contributor for domestic worker. And also we wish to note that within the care sector, domestic worker working on care sector, we noted as well that it is very hard for standard qualification in the destination country for the care worker working in the situation of domestic family to have them registered as a proper help worker. And that's why we need strongly to have a certain standard to be put forward for this one. I thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other member states. Then I can give the floor to other stakeholders. I think we can have two questions from other stakeholders because of the time limitation. Okay, it's so hard to see the back of the room. Please, ma'am, in the middle, go ahead.
I am Lissy from India, Hyderabad. Thank you, Fish, for sharing that the initiation of migrant workers' possibility, migrant domestic workers' possibility for organizing and forming associations, unions, etc. I just wanted to ask, what is the percentage of workers who are able to be organized into the unions or association in the country of destination? Because we know the workers who are working full-time within the homes without any kind of break, 24/7, there are very little possibilities. And I see this as an opportunity to promote this concept of the right to organize, form association becomes a reality, so that all the countries take possibility for this. So just want to hear from the suggestions, what are the possibilities of getting other workers, what's the percentage, and what are the possibility for the other workers to come into these associations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over there in the corner, right there, I can see just one. I only cannot have one more, and then the panelists will comment. The last one in the corner, please. Is that William? Yeah. Go ahead. It's very difficult to see, but please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This is a question to Mr. Ajit, but it's also a follow-up to the question raised by the Philippine government. Because countries of origin are spending now a lot on skill development. And while we agree with that notion of development of skills, the problem is it is not matched with what is a reference wage to the skill development. And so what happens is countries of origin spend a lot on skill development, but wages don't increase, like Fish has just said. So is there a way of looking at skill development that is standardized and a corresponding reference wage to that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Polawat would like to comment.
Thank
Go ahead.
you for your questions. So in Sri Lanka, before we develop any qualifications, we look at local and overseas requirements. If it is domestic workers, we see where are they going, and then those countries' requirements we take into account. And also we look at the local requirements, and based on that, we developed what we call national competency standards, which specify the set of skills the person must have at work. And based on that, we develop the curriculum and then teach the program in centers accredited by us. So those, all the courses are standardized, quality assured through the NVQ system. So there won't be any suspicion or any issue in relation to skills of a person who is having NVQ. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fish, you like to comment?
Thank you so much again for the questions and strong interest on the migrant domestic workers. In regards to Indonesia member states question about the standard, I think we really should join forces and efforts to discuss on that. With that, actually the workers themselves know very well our skills and our skill level. So if we can involve the workers concerned in the discussion on the skills, how to make the standard, you will give a very good standard qualification framework. And I'm sure the UN agencies will be around to help us. I assume they will assist on the country level on developing on that. On the unionized percentage, it is so low. I quote the example from Hong Kong, where I'm based on. We have 350,000 migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong, but the unionized migrant domestic workers is less than 2,000. So you can imagine how very little. But what is the most difficult part for migrant domestic workers to be organized? Not only because they are constrained into the private households, but also they are largely not enjoying weekly day offs in the region. So I really call for strong concern on this matter, because imagine any one of you sitting here working every day, 24/7 on call. So just put ourselves into the shoes of the migrant domestic workers and thinking about how we can revise and reform our labor law framework to ensure rights to rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Fish. I'd like to give the last question to our friend from the Pacific. Sorry, I did not see you earlier. Please, this is the last question. Thank you. Go ahead.
Talofalava. My question is for Mr. Timothy Breyer, Program Advisor, Climate Mobility. Two-part. First question, how can we reframe the discussion of climate migration away from a unidirectional linear process? How do we look at this, and how do we bring people back to the region? You spoke to the loss of people. How do we recruit back? Second, how do we build regional leadership in climate sciences and technology-based responses to building for the diaspora of Pacific peoples?
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Brian.
Thank you for those challenging questions. I think the first question you raised is really important. And to give an example, I'm thinking of a labor mobility example in Samoa, where they realized that the people accessing the scheme were already employed and highly skilled workers. And so, again, when I was talking about enabling the conditions of the country to be as such that people have opportunities and lessen the drivers of migration. So they've switched now where if you have a job in Samoa, then you have to you're not allowed to apply for these labor mobility schemes. I'm not sure that answers the first part of the question, but I think there's also some research now about how do we make remittances actually work for resilient development. So if countries are prioritizing enabling people to stay in their homes, and labor mobility is a part of adaptation to climate change, how do we make sure that those remittances are coming back to strengthen those conditions in which people can stay in their homes? I think that's really important. Secondly, there is a lot of work going on in the region in terms of climate change. There's maybe 3 organizations working on climate change. So, the organization SPREP, for example, is doing a lot of work using technology, measuring biodiversity, looking at tipping points that might force people to move. And there's also an important element here about integrating traditional knowledge into those decision-making processes too, around habitability, immobility, and mobility.
Thank you very much. So, dear delegates and participants and panelists, we have to bring this roundtable to the close now. I think we have heard quite a lot from our panelists, but also from participants on many really important progress made now, but also many critical challenges remain. Many good recommendations have put forward to continue all the good work in Asia Pacific region. So I'd really like to thank our panelists for your many good sharing that you have shared with us this morning. And also thank you all participants for your participation. Now I'd like to hand over back to our chairperson to continue the discussion in the plenary of agenda item 3A. Thank you very much. And a big applause to our panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bonpala, and all the panelists for the interesting and enriching discussion that we had. Indeed, there are so many pertinent points being highlighted. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I will now open the floor for country statements. As we have limited time for interventions, considering that there are 3 roundtables to follow, I would like to urge and invite all speakers to strictly adhere to the time limit of 3 minutes. Delegations called upon will speak from their seats, and the Secretariat has received many speaking requests, and we will also call on governments in the room which raise their flag. However, given the limited time that we have, we will only call on stakeholders which have not yet spoken. I will first open the floor to statements from members, associate members, and observer countries. I will then invite statements from intergovernmental organizations, United Nations entities, and representatives of stakeholder groups. I open the floor for statements, and now we will have the statement from China to be followed by Vietnam. You have the floor.
Dear Chair and Excellence, thank you very much for giving this opportunity to share with you the following points. First, China constantly transcends migration governance by addressing the root cause of migration problems and eliminating unfavorable circumstances and structural causes of displacement by enhancing its overall national trends. China has promoted the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We call on the international community to build a global development community to reduce migration problems. WIT applies a new development philosophy, promote high-quality development, and foster a new pattern of development. Second, we transcend the use of technology and digital tools to provide efficient and convenient custom clearance and convenient policies. The National Immigration Administration of China, this NIA, has accelerated the development of Internet Plus to achieve a comprehensive online access to government services and online application for travel documents. We have simplified procedures, streamlined process, and reduced the burden of obtaining travel documents. We utilize technological and digital tools to enhance custom clearance efficiency. We also develop a series of measures to facilitate cross-border trade for business, streamline border inspections for international talents, and support foreign nationals traveling to China for business, tourism, and leisure in full support of high standard openness and high quality development. And third, we protect the legal rights and interests of foreigners who work in China. According to the law, foreigners should obtain work permits and work-type residence permits to work in China. Chinese legislation, such as labor laws, ensure equal protections of employment and related rights. Foreign workers, regardless of their ethnic groups, race, sex, religious beliefs, shall not be discriminated against in employment. And fourth, release information on immigration policy in time. The NIA has proactively published immigration laws, regulations, and related administrative service guidelines on government websites and timely inform the public of policies and changes regarding entries and exits, residence, work, studies, or other activities. We have simultaneously published the government websites and on the social media platforms to facilitate public understanding and access to relevant information. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, the distinguished delegates of China. The next speaker on my list is the distinguished delegate of Vietnam, whom I now invite to take the floor, followed by Sri Lanka.
Chair, distinguished delegates, migration, though having potential for development, is a choice, not a necessity. Therefore, it is crucial to minimize adverse drivers that motivate people to move through unsafe and irregular channels while ensuring safe, orderly, and regular migration, including by enhancing the availability of pathways as well as promoting fair and ethical recruitment. So far, Vietnam has undertaken many actions outlined in this cluster of objectives, particularly Objectives 2, 5, and 6. Vietnam continues to accelerate the implementation of the National Implementation Plan for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and now ranks 54th out of 166 countries with the highest score in SDG 1, ending poverty in all its forms everywhere. In July 2022, Vietnam issued the National Strategy on Climate Change through 2050, which sets out solutions to reduce vulnerability, enhance resilience, and ensure the safety and livelihoods of people in areas prone to severe impacts. Vietnam also strengthens efforts to expand safe labor corridors through the signing of bilateral agreements that ensure fair and ethical recruitment and uphold the rights of migrant workers. Many agreements have been signed at the governmental, ministerial, and provincial level, including the MOU on the recruitment, employment, and repatriation of workers signed with the government of Malaysia, and the MOU on supporting Vietnamese citizen participation in the Australian agricultural visa program signed with the government of Australia in 2022. Despite a lot of progress in ensuring voluntary, safe, orderly, and regular migration, there remain gaps and challenges such as data collection and increasing risks of irregular migration and human smuggling, human trafficking, particularly for forced criminality due to the rapidly rising AI and technology. In this regard, stronger collaboration among relevant stakeholders is key to facilitate and expand regular and safe migration pathway as a basic to effectively prevent irregular migration and human trafficking and timely protect the rights of migrants. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of Vietnam. The next speaker on my list is distinguished delegate of Sri Lanka, whom I will now invite to take the floor, followed by Cambodia.
Good morning. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Sri Lanka recognizes migration as an essential driver of social and economic development. Our commitment to the protection, integration and contribution of migrants aligns closely with the objectives of the Global Compact for Migration. On Objective 14, Sri Lanka has strength, laws and systems to protect migrant workers. The Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, SLBFE, plays a pivotal role in this, providing free departure training, ensuring legal safeguards, and offering critical support to workers facing exploitation. The SLBFE also provides reintegration assistance for returnees, ensuring a smooth transition back into our communities and offering opportunities to rebuild their lives. On Objective 16, we have focused on enhancing our response to migrants in crisis, especially in the face of natural disasters and conflict. Sri Lanka, in partnership with international agencies, has strengthened emergency assistance mechanisms and worked towards creating safer migration pathways to ensure that migrants in distress receive the support they need. On Objective 19, Sri Lanka continues to emphasize the importance of regular migration channels. We are committed to expanding safe and legal migration opportunities for Sri Lankans seeking employment abroad, ensuring that workers can migrate with dignity and security, while also minimizing the risks associated with irregular migration. On Objective 20, promoting social cohesion and preventing discrimination is at the heart of our approach. Migrants make invaluable contributions to Sri Lankan society, both economically and culturally, and we are dedicated to fostering an inclusive society that values diversity and ensures equal treatment for all. Finally, on Objective 22, we recognize the significant role that migrants play in development. Remittances sent by migrant workers support families and communities, while the skills and knowledge migrants bring back enhance our workforce. The SLBFE continues to implement programs that empower migrants, enabling them to contribute meaningfully to both the countries they work in and Sri Lanka upon their return. In closing, Sri Lanka remains committed to ensuring that migration is safe, orderly, and beneficial for all. We are fully dedicated to advancing the protection, integration, and development of migrants in line with the Global Compact for Migration's objective. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Sri Lanka. And next speaker on my list is the distinguished delegate of Cambodia, apologies, whom I now invite to take the floor, followed by Maldives.
I thank you so much, Madam Chair. Cambodia would like to highlight the situation and challenges regarding to the trend of migration and way forward. In the past few years, a new trend of migrant movement have combined with a new type of perpetrator while using the high capacity of information technology, and perpetrators are also smart in using it. They can attract vulnerable people easily by contacting to a strong network from country to country. Perpetrators have more and more experience in abusing and exploiting victims. However, the act of crime committed by perpetrator is sealing with the willing of the people, make the crime expanding faster and very complicated, difficult to distinguish as the victims or perpetrator, because victimization and criminalization can be occur consecutively and combined with various forms of crime, including kidnapping, trafficking in persons, sexual abuse, physical and mental violation, etc. In recent years, the beautiful and peaceful country, Cambodia, has been considered as from outsider and being attacked by many sources of news in the region and outsider to distract the interest of the world to complain Cambodia as a worst place of criminal cases. Please note that Many nationals, more than 70, are coming to Cambodia, and thousands of them are willing to find easy job and high salary. Introduced by perpetrator and coordinated by a worldwide network, including online scam. Those type of migrants do not apply proper legal documents arranged by the legal channel. Therefore, migrants have been abused and exploited by perpetrators, and some have been forced for criminality. This criminal appears from country to country, which prove that perpetrator networks spread out everywhere and throughout the region. Besides that, many migrants, including Cambodians, are recruited for working at the risky area where the lack of management and safety, including fishing industry, which need to discuss furthermore. Actually, migrant workers are the main resources to contribute a huge amount for the economic growth in both recipient and origin country. However, many of them have been abused and exploited at all stages of migration cycle. The social issue rise up, including physical, sexual, and mental health problems, aging, weaknesses, especially the lack of proper care, education, and legal identification for their children, lack of housing and land property for surviving while returning home, homeland, especially among whom have left behind the country for a long time, and the migrant children who have been deported from home back home while their parents are dismissed or disappear. These are challenges and issues to be solved and shared among us by both origin and destination countries with relevant stakeholders. In this
May I
regard,
please
we learned
invite
that
you to conclude,
only
Madam
victim or
Speaker?
survivor, I'm sorry, and protection support is not enough to make the migration safe and benefited, but also need to eliminate the criminal network by maintaining surveillance to trend of exploiters, cutting the network, and to bring criminals to court and taking responsibility on the huge damage occurred by committed by this criminal
Please
against
conclude your
victim and society.
statement, Madam Speaker.
Thank you so much.
All right.
I finished my
Thank you,
statement.
distinguished
Thank you.
delegate of Cambodia. And the next speaker on my list is distinguished delegate of Maldives. You have the floor.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege to speak at the round table on ensuring that migration remains voluntary, safe, orderly, and regular. Recognizing the significant contribution of migrant workers to our economy and society, the Maldives has implemented several measures to enhance migration governance. We are set to endorse our national migration health policy, guaranteeing healthcare access for all migrant workers. To improve data-driven policymaking, we are developing a labor information management system and collaborating with ILO to formulate the Decent Work Country Work Program. This initiative emphasizes a minimum wage for all workers, occupational health, and climate resilience in the labor market. With the support from IOM, we are establishing a migrant resource center to offer information and assistance to migrant workers. We have also initiated a program to integrate undocumented migrant workers into the formal labor system. Moreover, the Maldives has enhanced two vital labor laws, the Industrial Relations Act and the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which provide rights-based protection for both national and migrant workers, including the right to unionize, engage in collective bargaining, ensure workplace safety, and receive compensation for work-related injuries. Additionally, We have initiated work on National Anti-Human Trafficking Action Plan 2025, focusing on prevention, detection, prosecution, and international cooperation. The Maldives remain committed to upholding the principles of safe, orderly, and regular migration, and we look forward to strengthening regional and global partnership in this effort. I thank you.
I thank the delegate, distinguished delegate of Maldives, and thank you for keeping the time as well. Are there any other governments which want to make a statement? As I see no other requests from governments, I will now open the floor for interventions from intergovernmental organizations and United Nations entities. I see none. As I see no other requests from the intergovernmental organizations or United Nations entities, I will now open the floor for interventions from stakeholders. The first speakers on my list is the distinguished representative of Association of Indonesian Migrant Workers, Association of Nationalist Overseas Filipino Workers in Malaysia, or AMMPO, to be followed by Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA. The floor is yours.
Honorable Chair and distinguished state members, good day. My name is Javelin. I am a Filipino migrant workers, domestic workers in Malaysia, and with the Association ng mga Makabayang Manggagawang Pilipino Overseas Malaysia. It is an immense privilege for me to speak specifically of the need of the legal protection and consistent enforcement of a weekly day off for all migrant domestic workers. Working without a weekly day off and there's not enough rest daily in the destination countries is a form of exploitation and abuse. I want to highlight the need of weekly 24 hours off as an essential issue that impacts the lives of migrant domestic workers across Asia and the Pacific. This simple yet profound change aligns with the global commitment to protect the rights and well-being of migrant workers as outlined in the Global Compact for Migration. The GCM adopted by the United Nations aims to ensure that migration is safe, orderly, and regular. It stresses the importance of protecting the rights of the migrants, particularly those in vulnerable positions, like domestic workers. One of the key objectives of the GCM is to promote the well-being and empowerment of migrants and guaranteeing our regular rest, including a weekly 24 hours off, is crucial in achieving this. Migrant domestic workers often face long hours, being isolated, and at times with exploitative working conditions. A lot of work without any time off is not only physically taxing, but also emotionally draining. We are saying this because we have the data evidence. We domestic workers conduct our own research to prove this situation. And I do believe that GCM has mentioned a lot on the importance of data evidence. One of the reports we made was the employer never saw a calendar. Why aren't migrant domestic workers in Malaysia getting a day off? The report exposes that almost all migrant domestic workers, at least 95% in Malaysia, are deprived of weekly days off. Close to half, almost 43% of migrant domestic workers surveyed work 7 days a week, and 41% of them only receive an occasional day off, mean day off once or twice a month. The deprivation of weekly day off affects workers' health. On most migrant domestic workers surveyed expressed that not having a day off impacted their mental and physical well-being negatively. We subject to physical violence, threats, and or verbal abuse by the employer if they asked for it. Furthermore, confiscation of workers' personal belongings impedes them to having a weekly day off. The right to a weekly day off is fundamental to maintaining the health and dignity for migrant domestic workers. However, migrant domestic workers have been denied these basic rights. Distinguished state members, the time has come to honor the commitment set forth by the Global Compact for Migration by ensuring the migrant domestic workers receive recognition in the Employment Act and national policies including protection for weekly day off. Our freedom of movement must be respected as others workers.
May I kindly invite you to wrap up, Madam
This is
Speaker?
a small but in fact step toward a world where migrant workers are treated with the respect and dignity we deserve, and we would like to call off of you to stop calling us maid, servant, pembantu, because we are workers. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegates of AMPO, and then next on my list is SIWA, or Self-Employed Women's Association, to be followed by Jaringan Buruh Migran, or JBM. Distinguished representative, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and it is with immediate concern and also action that we are raising the issues of migrant workers in this platform of talking about the implementation of GCM policies, especially in the context of ensuring voluntary, safe, orderly, and regular migration. And in the context of the discussions that have been happening, I would like to stress that after many years of working with migrant workers, especially in the global south, still we are taking the same issues of irregular migration pathways, and also forged passports, pushing of migrant workers in the immigration processes, and also violation of their rights in the sending and also in the destination countries. So I think it is important for us to discuss these issues very seriously when we talk about rectifying the issues and in the context of a right-based platform for discussing the rights of migrant workers. First of all, one of the things is that when you talk about the rights of migrant workers, the informal nature of migration is increasing after when talking about orderly and regular migration. And so with respect to the increasing informality, there are no immediate measures be taken to rectify the process and to make the workers formal. That is something that has been absent. And second, in the panel discussion, we talked a lot about domestic workers, but it is a very sad state of affairs that in Asia, only one country have ratified the Convention 189, and all other countries at the same time were signatory to the ILO Convention 189. And actually, we urge all the countries present here to the governments in their respective countries to force the countries to ratify ILO Convention 189, so that when we talk about migrant workers, the rights of migrant care workers, both in the origin and destination countries, their rights are protected. Second thing is, gender discriminatory policies are very much affecting the rights of women migrant workers in terms of restriction of age. When there are rules regarding the right to freedom of mobility and right to work, still migrant workers in many countries below 30 years are not supposed to migrate, and this is a very discriminatory practice that has been followed, especially in South Asian countries. So at this time, when we talk about the review of GCM, it is important for us to rethink about these discriminatory practices and how it is affecting the right pathways of migration and also the migration governance in the countries. So I think when you talk about migration, the entire issue of workers are being thrown out because the issue of labor has been absent in any of the migration governance process. So when it comes to bilateral agreements, when it comes to stakeholder discussions, migration in terms of labor rights, migration in terms of the representation of labor, it's being absent in most of the discussions. So we urge the countries and also the other stakeholders and the tripartite forums and the UN agencies to kindly think about or forcefully think about the inclusion of the stakeholders, including strong workers representatives, trade union representatives, and also how do we include the process of social dialogue and collective bargain in our demand, so that the workers are able to assure their rights in both the sending countries and also in the destination countries. We want the right to organize, we want the right to decision making, we want the right to be part of the decision making process, and also we want to be part
I'd like to invite you to wrap up,
decision
please.
makers, a very strong voice as workers in the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the distinguished representative of SIWA. And then next on my list is distinguished representative of Jaringan Buruh Migran, to be followed by National Workers Movement. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm Safitri Wisnuwardani, representing Jaringan Buruh Migran, coalition of 27 organizations, both in Indonesia and abroad, to ensure that migration is voluntary, safety, orderly, and regular. From our study, the reason why women migrant workers migrate are due to gender inequality, not being involved in the decision-making process, economic discrimination, and the impact of climate change and extractive industry. Therefore, we urge for policy and services that eliminate discrimination against migrant workers in a country of origin and a country of destination based on human rights principle and the gender equality principle into policy, portable social protection, decent work services, welfare services. Policies made must based on the evidence taken from the experience and need by migrant workers itself. Second, women migrant workers are often undervalued, de-skilled, and exploited by the employment agencies. We urge policy and services should promote the upgrading skills, including upskilling, reskilling, and skill for upward mobility. Third, in relation to charging migrant workers, we urge for policy based on the principle of fair and ethical recruitment that recruitment fee and related costs should not be charged to migrant workers. And four, we urge that bilateral and multilateral labor migration agreement comply with the international labor standard and UN treaties so that all migrant workers has access to decent work, social protection, education, public services, vocational training, and family reunification. And lastly, we urge countries of origin and destination to ratify the ILO Convention C87, C97, C157, C102, C189, C190, and C181, and International Convention on Migrant Workers to prevent abuse, harassment, and violence by promoting occupational safety and health, fair and decent work. I thank you.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much for distinguished representative of Jaringan Buruh Migran. Next on my speaker list is the distinguished representative of National Workers Movement, to be followed by Center for Migrant Advocacy Philippines. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity of coming together here. Greetings to you from all the migrant workers, especially the women migrant workers whom I represent. Unity of the bottom of the pyramid is very important to reach our goal or our objectives. To this effect, organizing domestic workers, organizing migrant workers, or forming association becomes very important. So that is a possibility. When these platforms are created, they can be informed, oriented, learn, understand, and become active to protect themselves from exploitation, vulnerability, unsafe path leading to order, regular, and informed choice of migration. For this, we need to have systems in place and to the reach out of the migrant workers. Secondly, equality of treatment is very important. Some of my friends have already mentioned about the ways of discrimination based on age, nationality, race, caste, age, gender, and work itself. We need to end discrimination and respect all migrants, making the migrant center of our choices, our discussions, our proposals. Third, every country needs to have laws in place and ratify the conventions which has already been mentioned. Fourth, there is a need to stop employer-tied visa, which my friends have already mentioned. There is no mobility of the migrant worker, especially the women who are confined to the homes as workplace. They cannot move out and there is no choice for them to be part of various processes. Fifth is a social protection, irrespective of their status. There is not even basic health care, accessibility to health they experience. So access to justice is very far from them. So the need for them to be included into the social protection, both in the country of origin and destination. So I think one of the possibility is the BLAs, bilateral agreements done together with the associations, trade unions together, and then ensure its implementation, its monitoring, and its evaluation in the right time. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, and this I thought was one of the special opportunity wherein lots of civil societies are present. I thank you, and I hope forward that these voices are heard in the final meeting at 2026. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished representative of National Workers Movement. Next on the list is the distinguished representative of Center for Migrant Advocacy Philippines, to be followed by MAP Foundation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, colleagues in advocacy, solidarity, greetings. The adoption of the Global Compact for Migration provided renewed hope and expectations that there will be marked improvements on the lives of migrant workers. After all, the GCM is lauded as the first ever multilateral framework on international migration governance. The ensuing COVID-19 pandemic, catastrophic as it was, would showcase how essential and indispensable migrant labor was, particularly in the healthcare, domestic and care work, agriculture, and transport. And yet, when the pandemic was over, it was business as usual. There was no build back better for migrant workers as hoped for. Our region is home to 58% of the world's population, 40% of the world's migrants, including 75.6 million or 70% of all migrants from countries within our region, our very own, if you will. They are concentrated in low-wage occupations like the millions of women migrants, dominating the domestic and other care work services for an increasingly aging population. Migrant workers are essential workers and agents of development. And yet, in the course of their migration journey, they continue to experience intersecting forms of discrimination, gender-based violence, and including prolonged separation from their families back home. Regrettably, the context and situation of migrant workers do not seem to matter as much because every step of the way, they have to negotiate and push back for their rights, as Nasrika mentioned yesterday. Excellencies, migrants' human and labor rights do not go away just because they cross the borders. But first, there should be an enabling mechanism for them to assert these rights. That is, their right to organize, form, and join workers' association must be recognized and supported. This is a basic right to social dialogue, enshrined in the foundation of the ILO. And yet, for migrant workers, it becomes the exception. We have to correct this. Secondly, migrants' rights, like rights at work, access to justice, access to sustainable social protection, right to health and safe work environment, among others, must be translated into laws and policies in origin and destination countries. These must have clear enforcement and monitoring mechanism so we can monitor progress of realization of these rights. Excellencies, a worker is a worker is a worker everywhere. All, without exceptions, must enjoy decent work conditions in order to live lives with dignity. This is what the GCM is all about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Distinguished representative of Center for Migrant Advocacy Philippines. Next on my list is the distinguished representative of MAP Foundation, to be followed by Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Honored, I'm over here. Honored delegates, my name is Brahm Press. I am the director of MAP Foundation, a Thai grassroots NGO that works to empower migrant workers from Myanmar to claim their rights. First, I want to acknowledge the Thai government's efforts to regularize cross-border migrant workers, of which there are just over 2 million documented migrants from Myanmar and Thailand. However, there may be another 1 million undocumented or partially documented migrants present. Part of the problem is that the registration system is complicated with requirements that necessitate the use of brokers at extra charge. It should be noted that migrant workers from Myanmar face numerous barriers to regular pathways. Foremost is the current political situation and ongoing conflict in Myanmar, which entails conscription of both men and women, the use of weapons of war on civilians, detention, and torture. These conditions impose extraordinary pressures on migrants to cross into Thailand, which is not a signatory of the UN Convention on Refugees. In fact, after the new conscription order, a truck coming from the border was found smuggling 169 undocumented migrants with a number of young women. Migrants from Myanmar who may be fleeing conflict-induced conditions and have a real fear of conscription do not receive any special recognition or protections. They are treated the same as regular economic migrants, making them more vulnerable to exploitation by employers and extortion by officials in order to remain in Thailand and avoid arrest and deportation. In fact, there is record of migrants being deported directly into the arms of the junta and immediately being conscripted. There is also a step in the current Thai registration process that shares personal data of migrants with the country of origin. This is problematic as most migrants want to avoid the Myanmar military government. Considering the grave situation migrants from Myanmar find themselves in, we call on the Thai government to ensure that migration is voluntary, safe, orderly, and regular by not requiring verification of personal data of all registered migrant workers by the Myanmar military junta, making the registration process accessible to migrants, including reduced fees, closed ID systems, streamlined processing, and significantly longer registration windows. And finally, stop deportations, prevent non-reforma, and reform detention. Thank you.
I thank the representative of MAP Foundation. Next on my list is the distinguished representative of Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants. You have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm Dewi Amelia, working with Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants. In November 2024, migrants and refugees gathered together to make their indicators in GCM. One identified issue is the drivers of migration. Migrants and refugees experience the rising cost of living, inflation, and this happens both in the sending countries as well as in the receiving countries. The cost of food that they eat, the utility they use, transportation, and other necessities are increased. The remittances, especially by low-wages migrant workers or temporary migrant workers, cannot pay for this rising cost of living. Migrant workers then are forced to find ways to augment of their earning only for their families to live. Unemployment situation in many countries remains to be a problem. Sending migrants overseas seems to be the only way to address unemployment and finding sources of living for the people back in the home countries. Unfortunately, labor export programs do not address the problems of the drivers of migration. It only continues the hidden commodification of migrants and do not address their living and working conditions, and not to mention the social cost of migrations. In this regard, particularly in the migrants and refugee indicators in the GCM, is for governments to acknowledge that economic crisis is one of the drivers of migration and therefore need to be addressed with concrete measures. With human rights-based and people-centered alternatives to labor export by creating jobs at home, supporting agricultural and industries in their home countries, which can generate decent domestic jobs and livelihood. Thank you.
Thank you for the distinguished representative of Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants. And as mentioned earlier, given time constraint, we will only call on stakeholders that did not speak yesterday. And given that the roundtable 2 coming next, I would like to thank the moderator, panelists, and delegates for their active participation. The meeting has now concluded its deliberation under agenda item 3A, ensuring that migration is voluntary, safe, orderly, and regular, addressing objectives 2, 5, 6, 12, and 18. We will now take up the agenda item 3B, protecting migrants through rights-based border governance, addressing objectives 4, 8 to 11, 13, and 21. The second roundtable discussion will be moderated by Ms. Pia Oberoi, the Senior Advisor on Migration and Human Rights, OHCHR Asia Pacific Regional Office. And may I please ask the moderator and the panelists of the second roundtable discussion to take their seat in the sofa chairs. Ms. Oberoi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. As the Chair has introduced, the objectives that we are reviewing within this roundtable reflect in many ways the promise of the Global Compact for Migration, pointing us away from laws, policies, and practices that securitize and militarize borders at the cost of right and dignity, and towards a human rights-based vision for the safe and regular movement of people within and from the region. These objectives, as you will hear about, contain important commitments to enhance rights-based border governance, to save lives, to protect migrants from enforced disappearances, to stop criminalizing migrants, to enhance the protection of victims of trafficking, to end immigration detention and ensure voluntary, safe, and dignified returns. Across each of these objectives is an unequivocal commitment to compliance with international human rights law. The GCM highlights that a critical enabling factor for rights-based border governance is in the first place the existence and implementation of sufficient and accessible pathways for regular admission and stay. Where these do not exist, the many forces that compel precarious migration, the high costs of regular migration, and restrictive and opaque migration policies combine to create conditions of uncertainties for states and risks for migrants. A second, equally critical enabling factor would be to move away from sweeping policies of criminalization of irregular migration, building on the guidance of human rights experts that such migration should be considered at most an administrative offense. The GCM recognizes the fundamental right of all persons to liberty, encouraging states to use immigration detention only as a matter of last resort, to end the detention of children and other vulnerable groups, and to work diligently towards alternatives, all of which, we would argue, establishes a strong presumption against immigration detention. The GCM recognizes also that states retain a sovereign prerogative to control entry as well as return from their territory, but that they must exercise this prerogative strictly in accordance with international law and standards. No migrant should be subject to refoulement, and all returns should guarantee due process, individual assessment, and effective remedy, including, where needed, alternatives to return. One final note before I hand over my opening remarks. Our region has recently been witness to an emerging form of human trafficking into cyber scam centers, where large numbers of victims are subject to severe abuse and exploitation. Along with member states and other stakeholders, this issue is one of great concern. We have recommended that responses to this complex challenge should be premised firmly on the human rights principle of non-punishment, which constitutes the cornerstone of protection. As others, we have been dismayed to see that there have been challenges in the implementation of this principle in counter-trafficking responses in the region. At its core, the non-punishment principle is aimed at ensuring that a victim of trafficking is not punished during the response. More broadly, the lesson learned from the responses to the multiple challenges raised by this emerging form of trafficking is that achieving better, more principled, and thus more effective border governance must inevitably rely in a very fundamental way on bringing about durable improvements in the wider rule of law and governance landscape, such as ensuring protection of civic space, securing a free and independent media, addressing public sector corruption, and avoiding impunity. Responses to migration challenges in the region have to go beyond punitive approaches, repressive policies, and militarized law enforcement responses. Border governance measures must instead be premised on a human rights-based and whole-of-society approach. They must seek to build the capacity of the myriad actors who are implicated in border governance, starting, of course, with border authorities, but continuing on to independent oversight bodies such as national human rights institutions, migrants themselves, civil society, and other stakeholders. To be true to the principles of the GCM, all border governance must indeed be human rights-based in purpose and effect. And to address you now on these and other challenges, as well as promising practices on border governance in our region, I am delighted to introduce you to our distinguished speakers on this roundtable panel, and I'll introduce them as they speak. Our first speaker is Mr. Fayez Murshid Kazi, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Bangladesh. Mr. Kazi, Bangladesh is a key country of origin of migrants in Asia. What are the key trends, challenges, and opportunities that you see facing Bangladeshi migrants as they seek to leave the country and work and live abroad, and when they return? How can these challenges differ for people of different genders? You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, moderator. It's a pleasure to be here for a change. The gender composition of this panel is stacked against me, and I'm quite pleased with that. And sorry for gate crashing the earlier panel. I was perhaps too eager to join this discussion. But thank you. Yes, Bangladesh is a country of origin and increasingly transit and destination. And we are a GCM champion country and a state party to the International Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and their Families. So these international instruments guide much of our national discourse on migration, including policy responses, academic work, and civil society engagements. On the positive side, there is sustained investment in a rights-based migration governance framework through a slew of policy documents, legal provisions, and administrative measures. As a state, we are still in a situation where migration is both a choice and at times a necessity. Even then, I should have no qualms in admitting that the Achilles heel in our migration governance remains a relatively high and often prohibitive migration cost. There are a number of factors and actors responsible for this, including, I must say, uneven, discretionary, and non-accountable border and immigration control measures across jurisdictions that are systematically exploited at the expense of potential migrant workers. These are further compounded by unpredictable, inaccessible, and stress-inducing visa regimes that are designed to discriminate against certain nationalities. Needless to say, these create an additional layer of disadvantage for female migrants and other vulnerable segments. Secondly, there is usually a push and pull dynamics at work in migration. Except in cases of forced migration or displacement, migrants themselves aim for destinations where they are aware that there may be scope for some form of their absorption in the local employment markets. To match such choices or decisions, whether informed or misguided, on their part, focus must continue to be given on promoting legal pathways for migration that should essentially involve streamlining border and immigration control measures. Otherwise, we are likely to see, if I can give an example, a mounting toll of migrant body bags, as we sadly witness across either side of the Mediterranean Sea. This brings me to my third point about the disproportionate emphasis given on return, readmission, and reintegration by border control agencies and many transit and destination countries. I wonder if the efforts and the resources that are deployed
for detention, legal procedures, and deportation in some of these countries, as you also mentioned, could not be actually channeled to promoting the employability of the concerned migrants that could be of benefit of all the parties concerned. Well, these suggestions may sound a bit rich when we hear about the deployment of thousands of additional forces to manage certain borders, but may still be worth considering by societies at large. And my fourth and last point would be about anti-migrant narratives that often proves to be most detrimental, especially for female migrant workers. I guess we are all familiar how certain sporadic incidents are blown out of proportion to impose whole-scale ban on recruitment or push back migrants at borders. Quite often, migrants serve political expediency, resulting in random shifts in policy responses that actually end up penalizing or criminalizing migrants in allegedly irregular situation, instead of going after the real criminal operatives, the traffickers or people smugglers. And in this context, I would like to thank our hosts, Thailand and its government, for the latest decision to disrupt cross-border power supply to online fraud centers as a much-needed remedial measure. I must say, to conclude, that my own government and society are also marked by some of the challenges and anomalies I just flagged as far as border issues are concerned. But GCM and its review forums do give us an opportunity to engage in honest introspection and open exchange of views. So my last request would be, let us all seize this opportunity to lift the doubts, questions, and shadows that still perhaps linger over GCM in certain quarters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kazi. Thank you for your open, your honest, but I think very needed reflections on the situation. Thank you also for mentioning predictability and accountability in the process of border governance, which is towards the adding to the need for pathways, for more pathways, for better narratives. So thank you very much for that, and I hope that we'll hear more from you. But we will now turn to our second distinguished panelist, who is Ms. Pekwan Patricia Low from Family Frontiers in Malaysia. Patricia, what are some of the main challenges that migrants and their families, women in particular, face in the context of marriage migration? What are the main barriers to accessing legal identity and documentation for migrants and their families? And how do these challenges impact women?
Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished delegates and all present here today. Thank you for this space to shed light on marriage migration, a long-standing but rapidly growing phenomenon, especially in this region. It is also highly gender-specific. Women make up a substantial proportion of marriage migrants. In Malaysia alone, there's an estimated 180,000 non-citizen spouses, 75% of whom are women, and this is a trend that is mirrored across key destination countries in this region. At Family Frontiers, we advocate for the rights and welfare of migrant spouses of Malaysians and their families. We're also part of APWLD's multi-country research on the women marriage migrants, with partners in South Korea, Indonesia, Philippines, and more. And as a spouse of a migrant myself, I carry with me lived experiences. Marriage migrants are integral to the social and economic fabric of the nation, but face immense barriers to basic services and protection. One is the lack of secure legal status and long-term residency pathways. In Malaysia, immigration laws and policies treat migrant spouses as temporary residents. Visas are short-term, permanent residence and citizenship is difficult to obtain, and employment rights are restricted. Despite having familial ties, their legal status remains uncertain for most of their lives. This is worse for separated, divorced, or widowed spouses. They have no viable pathways to remain, even if they have lived here for decades and have citizen children, and they face the risk of deportation and family separation. Some women in our network have been forced to leave Malaysia and their children behind, returning only as tourists if they can afford it, or waiting from afar, longing to reunite with their children. Migrant wives who return to their home countries, by choice or not, need safe reintegration and support, especially survivors of gender-based or domestic violence. In Asia, where patriarchal structures persist, migrant wives often have their legal or residence status tied to their husbands, putting them in precarity if the marriage deteriorates. This dependence can be exploited for control, trapping them in abuse out of fear of deportation or separation from their children. In Malaysia itself, non-citizen spouses require the consent and presence of their Malaysian spouses simply to renew their visas and apply for work permission. Marriage migrants in Malaysia also face employment restrictions, depriving them of financial independence. Women are hit the hardest. In 2023, only 15,000 or 11.5% of them were legally employed. Notably, many were once migrant workers, but despite a change in visa status, continue to face curtailment of rights. Many are engaged in informal work and unpaid labor, such as in agriculture, care work, and in family businesses. Marriage migrants face limited access to basic services, social protection, and legal support in destination countries. In Malaysia, they are excluded from the mandatory EPF or pension funds, certain labor protections, and they struggle to open bank accounts, especially if they are homemakers or unemployed. Undocumented spouses are denied access to subsidized public health care, forcing pregnant women to avoid hospitals, risking their health and lives due to exorbitant foreigner fees and fear of arrest. Marriage migration can arise from both voluntary and involuntary circumstances, and female marriage migrants often face commodification and exploitation. Brokers and matchmakers frequently facilitate transnational marriages. This pathway can be a guise for human trafficking and sexual slavery. Our research partner, Kababumi Indonesia, has documented cases of women in West Kalimantan who, driven by structural poverty, migrated for marriage through brokers and experienced debt bondage, fraud, economic exploitation, and isolation. Our research also reveals a troubling link in Malaysia between childhood statelessness and marriage migration. When one spouse is a migrant, discriminatory laws and complex administrative barriers can prevent marriage and birth registration, leaving children without legal proof of parentage or nationality options. In Malaysia, undocumented migrant spouses cannot register their marriages legally, putting their children at high risk of statelessness, leading to intergenerational statelessness, especially in border areas. So in conclusion, while I focused on Malaysia mostly today, similar issues arise elsewhere, including in our partner countries, South Korea, Indonesia, where the challenges may manifest differently. But the challenges are immense and they remain insurmountable. So if you'd like to learn more, do join us on our side event on marriage, migration, and GCM tomorrow during the lunch hour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you for raising an issue that is maybe a little less discussed in these forums, reflecting on the need for secure legal status, but also bringing really into focus the humanity of migrants, the need for them to access the full spectrum of their human rights along the migration cycle. Our last but not least speaker is Ms. Fiona Robertson, Manager for Asia and the Pacific of the Mixed Migration Center. Fiona, what are some key protection gaps at borders along migration routes in Asia and the Pacific, in particular when it comes to missing migrants? How is immigration detention being used in the region as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Pia, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Good morning, distinguished guests and stakeholders. The data and stories shared by migrants and refugees with MMC shows that many are aware of the risks that they face along migration routes, such as violence, death, and detention. Yet, in the absence of safe and regular pathways, they often feel that they have no choice but to embark on these dangerous journeys. One key driver of this is tight border controls, including pushbacks, which force migrants to embark on these dangerous journeys. Taking the Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal as an example, which is a route taken by many Rohingya refugees and Bangladeshi migrants, there has been a 57% increase in the number of dead or missing individuals in 2024 compared to 2023. making it one of the most dangerous routes in the world. However, not only is this journey itself dangerous, but the lack of rights-based protection, the lack of a rights-based protection approach means that the boats are often pushed back or left stranded for weeks, leading to death from starvation, dehydration, and violence. Another consequence of the restrictive border policies is the increased reliance on smugglers. Migrants and refugees feel the need to rely more on smuggling networks to evade detection. And a further consequence of the restrictive border policies is the increased dependency on these smugglers. As border controls tighten, migrants and refugees rely more on smugglers to evade detection. Smugglers, in turn, adopt riskier strategies to avoid border enforcement, often exposing migrants to more dangerous land routes, being abandoned at sea, or being forced into inhumane conditions. Interestingly, however, MMC research has showed that migrants and refugees rarely paint smugglers as the perpetrators of these risks, calling into question, therefore, the impact of increased border restrictions on the protection risks of migrants and refugees. In terms of immigration detention, contrary to what is articulated in human rights instruments, many countries in the Asia and Pacific region adopt immigration detention, including for children, as a default policy to deter migration. Detention is often indefinite, arbitrary, and lacking due process, with migrants held for prolonged periods without any legal recourse. Outdated legal frameworks prioritize detention, lack protections, and maintain low ages of criminal responsibility to justify child detention. Detainees may also lack access to assistance from embassies or CSOs and be unable to contact family members. Poor record keeping means that often family members are unable to trace where their loved ones are, and weak tracking systems lead to gaps in monitoring post-detention experiences. There is also a tremendous mental health toll on migrants and refugees who have been detained. Research shows that there is no amount of time that an individual can be held for it not to have a detrimental impact on their mental health. In a study conducted by MMC on the impact of immigration detention, we found that the impact of immigration detention policies goes beyond the detention of just the individuals themselves. It had long and medium impact on the families of these migrants and refugees too. However, there have been some promising developments in terms of alternatives to detention in the region. So, for instance, Indonesia implemented a presidential decree to recognize alternatives to immigration detention for children, which includes allowing them to be placed in shelters rather than detention centers. Malaysia has similarly explored alternatives to detention. Finally, Thailand has also improved its migrant registration system and its approach to community-based alternatives to detention for families and children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for highlighting the structural barriers that relate to the issue of missing migrants and border governance, but also to highlight some of the promising practices that we hope will be replicated then and taken up across the region. So thank you again very much to the distinguished panelists. We now have a little time to open the floor to you all for some questions or comments. We'll have one round and we'll then go back to the panelists. Could I ask for any member states that wish to take the floor in the first instance? I don't see any. I saw that there might. Okay, maybe we can then go to the stakeholders. Are there any stakeholders The lady just in front here, please.
Working in the grassroots, we have many migrant workers who are in the jails, maybe 15 years, even more than 15 years. So many missing. So I don't know what could be the way forward. When the work contract or the employer misses that migrants because she has run away due to certain reasons, can they inform the embassy? Secondly, those in the jails, detention centers, can they be traced, find possibilities? Because when these migrants, when they did not know the language, they have been implicated in the cases that they have not done. And there were no possibility for explanation. They did not know the language. So there is no such assistance. So these are some of the issues that I would like to bring to the forum for concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there other requests? Yes, the lady in front here, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Amba Pandey and I represent Global Research Forum for Diaspora and Migration. I would like to bring up the matter of student migration to this enlightened gathering, which has been totally out of this discussion. So I truly appreciate the efforts of various countries to implement safe, orderly, and regular migration. However, in this discussion, I find that there is hardly any focus on student migration. My general question to all the government representatives is whether they engage with this group of migrants who end up being workers in the receiving countries despite paying very high education fees, most of which is financed by loans. As a result, they become similar to bonded workers. They take up any kind of work, often less than the minimum wages. They also are vulnerable to becoming involved in unlawful activities to sustain themselves and pay back their loans. They face racial discrimination, unlawful detention, mental health problems, and several other problems very common to the other migrant workers which we are talking about. So why are we keeping them completely out of this discussion? That's my humble request. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We had a question from here. Yes, please.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Fish from the IDWF, Organizing Domestic Workers. My question is for migrant workers. We want us to have documents to travel. We want to travel safely and with rights. So I would like to ask if any panelists, you have any research or data on how the migrant workers initially, they have work visa, but then later on they become in irregular status. And in your experiences, what are the issues or policies that make them end up in an irregular status and even missing and later arrested and even detained? One observation that we have seen after the COVID period, more migrant workers, migrant domestic workers has ended up in irregular status and then arrested. We have seen in the region more raids against migrants in irregular status and ended up detention, the situation. Do you also have the same observation? And if yes, then what have been the factors leading to this situation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, there's a lady at the back there, please.
Hi, my name is Momina and I'm from Maldives, Human Rights Commission of the Maldives. I have two questions. One question is, in some countries when a migrant worker married to a local, their marriage is registered, while the original country of where migrant workers belong to, in that country sometimes the marriage is not registered because they tied with the fathers, they tied the marriage registration or birth registration of the child with the father. That's the reason why sometimes when there's a separation, these children become stateless in one country. So for this situation, how can we handle such situation where the children are not affected and while also protecting the rights of the mother as well? And in this situation where when there's a separation in my country, where the if a migrant worker wants to stay with the children in the country, there are certain difficulties to stay in the country where the visa is needed, and in this situation, why cannot someone, if there's a separation also, when there's a marriage visa is already tied initially, why can't they enter into employment, permanent employment or temporary employment, or stay with the children in the cases of a separation? The other question is, migrant workers who are reported missing, sometimes they ended up missing because of the employment situations where they work, sometimes not paying their salaries or poor working condition and vulnerabilities they enter into. In these situations, when these migrant workers are reported of being missing by the employer, sometimes the legal authorities, they take them to the immigration detention center. Immigration detention center is technically an administrative detention center, but sometimes this happen to be this is a facility where correctional service officers look after the securities, and the immigration detention center becomes rather than an administrative detention center, it becomes more of a legal processes they enter, and they've been deprived of their liberty. They cannot move out, and they've been restricted of so many things like family calls, family visits, and so many things bounded there. So these kind of difficult situations where migrant workers face in immigration detention centers. So why there's a need of immigration detention center? Correctional officers need to manage the security. Is it a practice in all the countries, or in some countries? In our country, immigration detention center security is managed by the correctional services. What are the best practices? Could you please share your thoughts? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a gentleman here, over here, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Shakil Akhtar Chaudhary. I am from Bangladesh, and my ambassador is there in the panel. So I like to share something. Basically, we have our around 13 million people, more than 13 million people now working abroad as a migrant worker. So they have a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues like the waste theft, like health and safety issues, and a lot more issues are there. We are working from our country level. The CSOs are working, trade unions are working. I am from the trade union. The government is also working, but there is a big gap in between the collaboration. So I would like to request Mr. Ambassador to take initiative that how can all the stakeholders can come together and to build a strong collaboration to protect the migrant workers in the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think we have time for, yes, one more question from the gentleman in the back, behind you.
Hello everyone, myself Ruben from Peace Trust, and I am one of the CSOs who are working on the ground level, and I see there should be a compulsory pre-departure orientation programs, and in my country we already have a 16-hour module, but it is not compulsory, and many of us are not aware of such programs, and it will ensure that there are their legal rights and the host country's laws and their cultural aspects, and which will ensure the grievance redressal mechanisms. And second thing is, the recruitment has to be digitalized, which will reduce the fraud, ensure transparency, and make the grievance mechanism more accessible. And third thing is, yesterday we also discussed about social security, but the financial literacy of the rural migrants who are not aware of any language, and it is very difficult for them to understand the foreign language. For example, from India, many people travel to UAE, but they don't understand the language there, and it has to be at least in a minimum simple way that they also can understand their rights and their laws, and the forms has to be in their native language. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think maybe we will end now because we've got, I would like to come back to the panelists. We've had a lot of very challenging, very important questions, I think, that have been asked of you. If you could choose which ones you would like to answer. Could I also ask you in these final remarks to describe some priority areas of cooperation and intervention from your side, from your perspective, to ensure rights-based border governance in the region? So, Ambassador Kazi, if I may come to you first, please.
Thank you. Indeed, challenging questions. And as you could see, I mean, border and immigration control issues are difficult. That's why perhaps the government representatives kind of hesitated making any comments or posing questions. But some of the recommendations that came from the stakeholders, I mean, I think we could entirely agree with all those. Regarding some of the questions, yes, as you can see, I mean, in the region, many countries are exploring alternatives to detention. So that's where probably the UN entities and stakeholders have a critical role to play, that what practices are proving to be useful or beneficial for migrants. Let us disseminate those practices even more so that we can all learn from those examples. There is a crying need for this because we are talking about this a lot, but all struggling to find the right kind of solution. The way forward, of course, one of the challenges that we face at the embassies, we often do not get to know about the detainees. When our migrants are detained or taken to custody, the information, there is often a lag. At times it so happens that the legal process has been exhausted and the migrant in question has been convicted as well, and only then we are notified about that. And at that point, it doesn't really leave us much scope to intervene. So one thing that we are trying to engage legal firms, legal specialists, but this can happen anywhere in the country, and there is a limit to how many legal representatives you can actually employ to support migrant workers who may be scattered throughout the country. So enhanced coordination with immigration authorities, that is, of course, the silver bullet that I can think of. Student migration, absolutely. I think when I talked about inaccessible, unpredictable, stress-inducing visa regime, I mostly had our students in mind. I mean, many often when they apply for visas, you know which countries I'm talking about, they and their parents, their guardians, I mean, spend sleepless nights wondering or worrying whether they would actually end up getting the visas, even after having made the payments to the educational institutions that they're trying to go to. At our levels from the embassies, of course, this is part of our responsibility. To answer to your question, we try to engage with our students as much as possible to address the challenges they face. Yes, they often take up jobs which are underpaid or where they're probably exploited, but there are circumstantial differences, and I wouldn't like to generalize as such. I'm very happy that the issue of marriage migration is coming up, particularly during this second review. And this is important. We see not just students, but many of our migrants, especially the female spouses, they do have qualifications, they do have degrees, but they are not being able to engage in gainful employments because their degrees or qualifications are not recognized. So this is another thing that we all need to work together, how to harmonize the recognition of skills and qualifications. I mean, this is probably one of the lower hanging fruits where, answering your question, I mean, we can forge cooperation. The issue about returnees, when they do not have the valid documents, what we do from the embassies is try to issue them temporary travel permits that allow them to go back. I think you have other aspects to your questions which other panelists may respond. I would just end by saying that we, of course, talk about sovereign prerogatives when we talk about border and immigration control issues. But in the 21st century, probably it's high time that we need to think beyond these traditional notions of sovereignty and national interests. If we take a kind of approach to human interest in conjunction with national interest, only probably then we would be able to address effectively some of the issues that we are all talking about. And lastly, to my compatriot, this is exactly the reason why Bangladesh actually mooted the idea of the Global Compact in 2016. We wanted the whole world to rally behind these issues so that we can have a platform to talk about this. So I hope, as you can see, that it is having a life of its own, and this is the desired direction that we would like to go collectively together. Thank you.
Thank you again, Ambassador Kazi. And now maybe I can hand to Patricia. There's a number of questions there also around, the migration of students, marriage migration, etc. Would you like to address that? And also the idea of cooperation. What would you recommend?
All right. Thank you. Thank you, firstly, Ambassador, for the excellent input and recommendation. I think it is crucial to harness the skills and the wealth of knowledge and capacity that marriage migrants bring to destination countries. Particularly, when I think of Malaysia, we are facing a brain drain problem. But yet, migrant spouses are not allowed to contribute to the country in terms of employment. And so that's something I'd like to also point out. I think also I think someone asked about falling into situations of irregularity. I would like to point out that marriage migrants can also fall into situations of irregularity. For example, if they are unable to access consular services, if they're unable to renew their passport. So, for example, in East Malaysia, where the states are wide and vast, and embassies or consulates are very few in number, a lot of them live in remote areas and cannot travel due to the distance, due to the cost, and sometimes they allow the passports to lapse. And when that happens, they become without legal identity. And with that, it's like a domino effect, because after that, they're too afraid to seek help or to try to remedy that situation for fear of arrest. And so that's also something that we face in marriage migration. And I think on that note, we'd like to urge governments to improve consular services, addressing geographical and financial barriers, and also to call on greater multi-country coordination to ease marriage registration, be very pertinent. For example, the provision of single status certificates by consulates, which is something a lot of our migrant spouses face difficulty when before marriage, they want to get married to a Malaysian. It is very difficult for them to get this document. Unfortunately, it's something that our government requires. And so I think we need to review and assess these processes and make them easier, and not to hinder or make people break the law, so to say. And I also like to recommend that destination countries to empower marriage migrants with clear information, support services, and protection mechanisms. On things like detention, I think just very quickly, I think immigration laws and policies must not punish children, but center their best interests. Governments must ensure these policies prioritize their well-being, dignity, and right to family life. And I'd like to also add that the gendered approach is essential. Policies must address power imbalances and the unique challenges faced by women migrants, women migrant workers, women marriage migrants. And yeah, so I think, thank you so much. I think it's a great privilege to be able to speak about marriage migration on such a platform, and we would like to see continued efforts, sustained efforts to talk about this issue and to get it to be addressed explicitly in the implementation of the GCM, as it is a form of migration that warrants targeted protection and policy considerations. Development of indicators that specifically address the issues faced by marriage migrants will enable this to be accounted for in the GCM. Member states can then utilize the GCM as a guideline to assess and create better and fairer policies for marriage migrants. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. And again, finally, but not least, Fiona, there were issues that were raised around the missing migration, around detention. I'm sure that you have something to add, and also, what would you recommend around cooperation?
Thank you, Pia. And thank you very much for all your wonderful questions. I think in terms of responding to them, I'd take a structural approach and also a procedural approach. So in terms of the questions around migrant workers who are detained, others who are detained, what we ultimately need is regular and safe pathways. If we look at why they're detained in the first place, it's because there are no inadequate regular and safe pathways, leading them to become irregular. In terms of practical approaches, there were questions around the data that is collected in prisons and immigration detentions and how this can be shared. So what we know is that there is a lack of comprehensive data collection across the board in the Asia-Pacific region. So that's one area that can be improved. And also through this more accurate data collection. So we know that sometimes migrants' names are incorrectly recorded, and that means that it's difficult to locate them. So they become a missing migrant, and people cannot find them. That also might mean that they can't get embassy assistance. So all of this comes down to really essentially better record keeping. And finally, you mentioned many stakeholders that are involved, and I think that just demonstrates the need for a whole of society approach in terms of addressing this issue. In terms of best practices for immigration detention, well, from a structural level, end immigration detention. MMC research shows that immigration detention, while it's intended to use as a way to prevent irregular migration, it doesn't act as a deterrent in any way. And that's because migrants know that there is this risk, but they run this risk anyway because they have to leave the situation that they're coming from. But then in terms of what else you can do, there are many examples of community-based approaches to alternatives to detention, and this is definitely an area that the GCM can support with, and UN agencies. So I think in closing, we need to recognize the tremendous potential of the GCM. And I think we also saw yesterday the good progress that many states have made, but there's a lot more work to be done, and the increased crisis of the missing migrants demonstrates that very aptly. So I think some priority areas for cooperation and intervention include, first, the creation of increased safe and regular pathways for migrants and refugees. Second, more evidence-based policy making. And this comes from better data collection on the risks and gaps in the region. And finally, an end to immigration detention. So drawing on the data that we've collected and tying this into evidence-based approach, we know that the evidence demonstrates that refugees and migrants still go on these journeys despite knowing the risks. So yes, UN agencies play an important role in the region by coordinating these efforts, and they should continue to use their skill set and resources to equip governments to implement the relevant objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I hand to our closing speaker, just one remark from my side, which is I think the main message of this panel has been to humanize, to think and treat migrants as humans in the border governance, in the migration governance policies that we put in place. Irregular migration is not a criminal act. It should be at most sanctioned as an administrative act, and from there, flow various policy measures. Migrants are people in all their complexity and diversity. They're workers, but they're not just workers. They exist in intersectional spaces, as we've heard. They exist within racialized and gendered hierarchies, as we've also heard. They exist as people, as mothers, as sons, as fathers, as brothers. And if we take this away from the panel, if we understand that our border governance measure starts from that humanity from which human rights arise, I think we can maybe move towards better, more principled governance measures. But in closing now, I'd really like to thank our closing speaker, Ms. Maria Holzberg, Deputy Regional Director for the Asia Pacific of UN Women, to please provide us with some closing remarks. Thank you, Maria. You have the floor.
Thank you so much for this amazing panel, and I think you summed it very, very well. Ms. Lowe, Ms. Robertson, Ambassador Kazi, thank you for sharing these critical perspectives, centering on the need for highlighting actually the complexity of what we were talking about. And I really think that also the questions that have come from the floor have enriched the contributions. I really want to thank you all. From what you from you and women's side, I think we are reiterating the urgent need to protect migrant rights at all stages of the journey. And I would like to emphasize the state's need to adopt rights-based and gender-responsive measures to address the issues at the borders and on other stages of the migration pathway. And Ambassador Kazi, I think the perspectives that you raised, all including talking about some of the sustained investment that have been made to create an enabling policy for migration, but and how you underscore that migration is a choice in many cases, but also a necessity, and that we need to have that balance. And when we look at the legal pathways that are challenged by border complexities, we potentially forget also this point about the migrants being focused specifically on employability and what service they provide both in the country of destination as well as during their transit and in their origin. I also, the points resonated on discussing, and this session in itself has been focused on talking about marriage migration and the risk, this potential brain drain of not providing the appropriate pathways for spouses who migrate by marriage, basically. And then also highlighting the points on the inaccessibility or the stress-inducing visa processes that are many countries impose. And this, again, impacts students, women and men who are embarking on a journey of their life for betterment, so to speak. I think we've sorry, I lost. Okay, yeah. So in order to underscore, we want to look at the safe pathways and also make sure that when we do talk about detention or immigration detention measures, to ensure that there's a robust gender responsive approach to immigration detention, and there's significant research and guidelines and good practices to share about how to ensure that we use a gender responsive lens in these measures. We need to be building in a rights framework. We need to uphold the principle of non-discrimination and ensuring that all migrants, irrespective of their migration status, are treated with dignity and respect. And this is maybe speaking to the point that you made, Ambassador, is this, if we're using this sort of human approach or human rights-based approach, and are treating migrants with dignity and respect, we do think that this will help address irregular migration. It will combat transnational organized crime and ensuring a safe migration journey throughout. So from UN Women's side, we really want to see to build on today's momentum. I appreciate the points about this being a safe space to have these conversations, to accelerate the implementation of rights-based and gender-responsive migration policies. We hope that our collective efforts will, and UN Women will stands by in this, will strengthen collaboration and prioritizing vulnerable groups, realizing the shared goals under this global compact on migration. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to be in this session.
Thank you very much. Can we give everybody involved a big hand, please? Thank you. And we will now hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oberoi, and all the panelists for this engaging and enlightening discussion. Again, more highlights and more pertinent points have been made through the discussion. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, I will now open the floor for statements, and I would like again to urge all speakers to adhere to the time limit of 3 minutes. 3 minutes to ensure that we can hear from all those participating. The Secretariat has received speaking requests, and we will also call on governments in the room who raise their flag. However, given the time, given the limited time we have, we will only call on stakeholders organizations which have not yet spoken. I will first open the floor for a statement from members, associate members, and permanent observers, and I will then invite statements from the intergovernmental organizations, United Nations entities, and representatives of stakeholder groups. I open the floor for statements, and I now invite the distinguished delegate of Vietnam to please take the floor, to be followed by the Philippines.
Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, during the migration cycle, migrants can face multiple risks such as discrimination, violence, forced labor, limited access to basic services, and even becoming victim of human trafficking and human smuggling, particularly happening to those without proper identity documentation. On November 27, 2023, Vietnam passed the law on identity effective from July 1st, 2024, which stipulates that people of Vietnamese origin with unknown citizenship are allowed to have an identity certificate, enabling them to register for temporary or permanent residence, and their participation in civil transaction, public services, and essential services to ensure their livelihoods. And furthermore, by adopting the revised law on human trafficking prevention and combat last November, effective from July 1st, 2020, this year, Vietnam reaffirmed its strong commitment to enhance counter-trafficking efforts in line with international treaty to which Vietnam is a party. The law stipulates a comprehensive definition of human trafficking as new prohibited actions, including the consent on trafficking in person from fetal stage, specifies support measures for those in process of victim identification as well as minors accompanying them, and expands victim support regimes. Vietnam continues to strengthen international cooperation in combating irregular migration through partnerships with many countries within and across the region, and active engagement in multilateral platforms. Since 2022, Vietnam has collaborated with the UK to organize the Vietnam-UK Migration and Immigration Dialogue to discuss solutions to prevent irregular migration to the UK and encourage safe and regular migration. Vietnam continues to co-chair along with New Zealand the working group on the disruption of people smuggling and trafficking in person networks under the framework of the Bali process. Vietnam has been effectively implementing agreements and MOUs on citizen readmission signed at the governmental and ministerial levels with 18 countries. We believe that close collaboration and collective efforts will advance right-based migrant governance to realize this cluster of objectives. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Vietnam, and I would like now to call on the distinguished delegate of the Philippines, whom I now invite to take the floor, to be followed by China.
Excellencies, good morning. I am pleased to address this esteemed gathering on behalf of the Philippines Department of Migrant Workers, the department mandated to protect and promote the rights and welfare of the overseas Filipino workers and their families. Republic Act 11641, the law creating the Department of Migrant Workers, incorporates and concretizes all of GCM's 23 objectives. Put simply, it institutionalizes the GCM. The Philippines has long been a pioneer in ethical recruitment, labor protection, and sustainable reintegration. We have programs that assist migrants throughout the migration cycle, be they land-based or sea-based, from pre-departure to employment and ultimately on return and reintegration. Speaking about sea-based, last September 24, we enacted the Magna Carta for Seafarers, outlining, enforcing the Maritime Labor Convention, and more than that, there is a specific chapter, Chapter 4 of the Magna Carta, which devotes on gender rights, women support for seafarers. With a growing Filipino community overseas, the Philippines has expanded its network of migrant workers offices. We now have 42 offices led by a labor attaché embedded within Philippine embassies worldwide, serving as frontline responders, particularly in conflict zones and emergency situations. On bilateral labor agreements, we have currently signed 48 labor agreements with different bilateral partners, and currently we are negotiating 38. On combating illegal recruitment and human trafficking, the Philippines has consistently upheld its commitment to combat human trafficking, earning a Tier 1 ranking in the U.S. Department of State's Trafficking in Persons report for 8 consecutive years. This recognition underscores the Philippines' robust anti-trafficking measures, strong victim protection policies, and unwavering enforcement efforts. One program we have is the Anti-Illegal Recruitment and Trafficking in Persons program. On leveraging technology, technological advancements present significant opportunities for governments to enhance migration governance. The Philippines has prioritized digital transformation, ensuring safe, regular, and orderly migration through data-driven solutions. We have the e-registry system, the DMW mobile app. We acknowledge the threats posed by cyber-enabled crimes, particularly in online recruitment fraud, in which case we have partnerships with global technology platforms such as Meta and TikTok, and which have led to the removal of 71,653 fraudulent recruitment posts in 2024 alone, a 6-fold increase from 2023. On sustainable reintegration requires that this is discussed with the OFWs at all stages of the migration cycle. Having programs in place is also a national priority. The Department of Migrant Workers implements a range of reintegration programs from financial literacy training to livelihood assistance, ensuring that migrant workers transition successfully back into their communities. While significant progress has been made,
sir.
Challenges remain. The establishment of the DMW as a dedicated agency for overseas Filipino workers reflect the Philippines' unwavering commitment to ensuring safe, orderly, and regular migration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of the Philippines. I would like now to call on the distinguished delegate of China to be followed by Cambodia.
Dear Chair, Excellency, thank you very much. Regarding this topic, I want to share 3 viewpoints. First, China ensures the rights of Chinese citizens and foreigners to exist and enter the country in accordance with the law. China safeguards the legal rights of Chinese citizens regarding exist and entries, ensuring that all Chinese citizens equally enjoy the right to nationality and shall legally apply for passport and other travel documents. China also protects the legal rights of foreigners regarding entry, exist, and residence in China, issuing corresponding documents for their entries and residence. Second, China ensures the legal rights of irregular immigrants and victims in accordance with the law, upholding the legislative principles of minimizing situations and duration of personal liberty restriction. The Chinese exit and entries administration laws have established specific provisions. The Chinese Immigration Administration authorities have treated irregular immigrants appropriately during law enforcement, paying particular attention to the humanitarian treatment of women and their minor children, as well as unaccompanied minors who enter illegally. The China NIA also collaborates with the IOMs on the pilot projects of assisted voluntary return and reintegrations, helping irregular immigrants in China voluntarily return to their home countries and start their new lives. Third, China prevents and combats cross-border human trafficking. The Chinese public security authorities and immigration administration authorities also adhere to the rule of law, employ systematic approaches, and address root causes. We have strengthened border inspections and administrations and cracked down on illegal activities such as cross-border smuggling and human trafficking. We also have enhanced international cooperation in combating cross-border crimes, work with relevant countries, and coordinate law enforcement to ensure the legal and orderly movement of people. During law enforcement, we promptly identified and rescued foreign victims, improves mechanisms for victim assistance, provides transit and rehabilitation service, and ensure their safe return. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of China. The next speaker on my list is the distinguished delegate of Cambodia, to be followed by Japan.
I thank you so much, Chair. Cambodia still iterate that keep its commitment to implement the GCM. To achieve the objective one, there are 5 outcomes has been set. Enhance collaboration between ministries and state resources to produce centralized migration statistics, create the comprehensive data collection mechanism to ensure accurate and national acknowledgement, create the national database on migration for analysis, dissemination, and sharing key data, develop a Cambodia migration profile to be used as a basic for developing the evidence-based migration policy, and monitor evaluate the quality of the mechanism and data used to conduct a review and revise national action plan. And to achieve the objective 11, we set also the outcome, appropriate structure and mechanism for effective border management to ensure cross-border procedure, respect human rights and applicable law, increase cross-border management collaboration for proper identification, timely referral, assistance, and protection of vulnerable migrants, Child Protection Authority to ensure participation in procedure for unaccompanied and separated children. To achieve the objective 23, there are increased international cooperation with neighboring countries to strengthen regular migration pathway, address challenge the migration through the partnership to implement bilateral, regional, and multilateral agreements, increase participation of local authority, union, private sector, and civil society to identify needs and opportunity for the international cooperation, increase protection of Cambodian migrant workers to safely finish contract, deciding to return to Cambodia to ensure safe, orderly, and regular migration, and to provide full protection by Cambodian law and policy for foreign migrants in Cambodia and returning Cambodian migrant. And we still keep in commitment to investigate the crime, occurred in Cambodia as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, the distinguished delegate of Cambodia. I would like now to call on the distinguished delegate of Japan to be followed by Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to share the activities Japan organized. First, for Objective 9 GCM, strengthen the transnational response to smuggling of migrants. Japan has been actively supporting UNODC's projects that contribute to strengthening measures against illegal cross-border migration of migrants and migrants in ASEAN countries, opening new border liaison offices, cooperation through border liaison offices, especially capacity building of staff, and so on and so forth. Also, Japan has supported UNODC's projects that contribute to strengthening measures against illegal cross-border. And then for the Objective 10, prevent, combat, and eradicate trafficking in persons in the context of international migration, Japan continues to implement various projects to prevent and eliminate human trafficking, including supporting the return and social reintegration of foreign trafficking victims recognized in Japan through contribution with IOM and training and awareness-raising activities for relevant organizations on human trafficking, especially in ASEAN countries in cooperation with organizations such as JICA, UNAFEI, and UNODC. Since 2005, Japan has been providing support for the repatriation and social reintegration of foreign trafficking victims recognized in Japan through IOM, such as employment and vocational support, legal support, medical expense counseling. Specifically, between May 2005 and December 2024, we have provided support for the repatriation of a total of 377 victims who wish to return to their home country, and of these, we have provided social reintegration support to a total of 222. Immigration Services Agency of Japan grants permission for resident status to foreigners recognized as trafficking victims after taking into consideration their individual circumstances. It is important to protect refugees and migrants who are in vulnerable positions, as well as to empower each individual. Based on the concept of human security, we need to advance various initiatives with the aim of realizing a society in which no one is left behind. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Japan, and next speaker on my list is the distinguished delegate of Indonesia. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. In line with the GCM objective, it is an honor for Indonesia to stand before this esteemed assembly and reaffirm our unwavering commitment to a right-based approach to border governance. Migration is not just the movement of people, it is a testament to human resilience, ambition, and necessity. As a country of origin, transit, and destination, Indonesia recognizes the profound responsibility we bear in ensuring the migration is safe, dignified, and rooted in respect for human rights. To protect our migrant workers abroad, Indonesia has strengthened legal framework, most notably through Law Number 18 of 2017 on the protection of Indonesian migrant workers. This legislation enshrines ethical recruitment, legal aid, and pre-departure training, ensuring every Indonesian working overseas is safeguarded from exploitation and abuse. Border governance has a great potential to strengthen cooperation among Asia-Pacific countries so that migrant workers entering another country or renewing their contracts are mandatory protected by social security. Indonesia also recognized the urgency of combating human trafficking and transnational crimes through our national task force to combat trafficking in person. We are enhancing victim-centered approach, strengthening law enforcement, and dismantling exploitative networks that prey on the most vulnerable. Yet, migration governance cannot be addressed in isolation. Regional and global cooperation are paramount. Distinguished delegates, as a co-chair of the Bali process, Indonesia is leading effort to foster dialogue, intelligence sharing, and capacity building to counter irregular migration. Through the Bali process, a vigilant cooperation among the country can be sought after. The curve trafficking in persons, including with the current trend of normalization of working in overseas online gambling institution. Indonesia wishes to seek a joint effort to identify and screen victims based upon the non-punishment principle for better procedure of the safe return. Within ASEAN, we actively champion the ASEAN consensus on the protection of migrant workers, ensuring stronger safeguards and labor protection across borders. However, challenges remain. Migration must be governed not by fear or restriction, but by policies
sir.
and protect, empower, and uphold human dignity. Let us work together to transform borders into bridges of opportunity, security, and hope. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Indonesia. And now, are there any other governments which want to make a statement? As I see no other requests from the governments, I will now open the floor for interventions from intergovernmental organizations and United Nations entities. I see none, and as I see no other requests from the intergovernmental organizations or United Nations entities, I will now open the floor for intervention from representative of stakeholder groups. And the first speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Federation of Asian Domestic Workers Unions, Hong Kong, China, or FADWU, to be followed by International Domestic Workers Federation, or IDWF. The floor is yours.
Thank you, distinguished guests here. I would like to bring attention to the migrant domestic worker situation in Hong Kong, how they lose work visa status due to abuses. For example, they are terminated without any wages or air ticket, not knowing how to seek remedy, having unpaid debt for recruitment fees, or don't have money to pay for recruitment fee for finding new employers. They quickly overstay and lose legal status because of the 2 weeks rule. Desperate migrants are forced to take illegal work and get arrested, prosecuted, jailed, minimum 15 months for even working for only 1 day, and detained in immigration detention indefinitely. In immigration detention, it is very hard to contact their families. Families don't know their whereabouts. Embassies see them as criminals and don't help them. The immigration restrictions on migrants are harsh and unfair. It will only result in more irregular status. No migrants want to be in irregular status. It is the systems that make them. Work is not a crime. The destination country needs migrants. I call for member states to abolish discriminatory immigration policies such as the 2 weeks rule, stop penalizing and detaining undocumented migrants, giving immunity status to victims of human trafficking and forced labor, ensure law against scrupulous recruitment agencies are enforced, and migrants are free from recruitment fees. And the last but not the least, ratify ILO Convention C189, decent work for domestic workers. The whole Asia is falling behind except the Philippines. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of FADU, and then now I would like to call on the distinguished representative of IDWF to be followed by Korea Center for United Nations Human Rights Policy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegation, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Baria, representing migrant workers as well as representing International Domestic Worker Federation with 670,000 membership of domestic workers around the world. In the Asia and Pacific region, migrant domestic workers plays crucial roles in household and societies, contributing significantly to economic and the family well-being for country of origin as well as destination country. Migrant domestic workers made the other work becoming possible. Despite their substantial contribution, many migrant domestic workers in Asia and Pacific face challenges as poor working conditions, long hours, low wages, and exclude access to social protection. In fact, today, we still receive many cases of migrant domestic workers being abused and even 20 years working without salary. Many migrant domestic workers are trapped in debt bondage due to high expenses of the recruitment fees, and many undocumented migrant domestic workers being victims of trafficking and forced labor. In destination countries, due to migrant domestic worker immigration status, their right to freedom of movement, freedom to speak, freedom to association are being denied and put their life more vulnerable. Even if they can speak and organize, they face the threat of being deported to their own home country. Therefore, many migrant domestic workers being disabled because of abusive employers and recruitment agency. And some of them only coffin return to their family. Distinguished delegation, ladies and gentlemen, besides these challenges, through organizing migrant domestic workers in destination country, we've been witness that many migrant domestic worker associations are able to claim back their unpaid salary and claim back their spaces in the policy-making decision process. Therefore, we want to witness more and more achievement by migrant domestic worker organizing in destination country. So again, we would like to call and to address to member states today to first recognize domestic workers, and we want to repeat again the importance of the ratification of C189 on the decent work and include domestic workers in employment laws in the destination country. Promote and implement zero-cost fee and other related costs, facilitate cross-border to access to justice for migrant domestic workers, and access to free regularization pathway for undocumented migrant domestic workers, and access to citizenship in the destination country. Last but not least, we would like to also call the member state to the important thing of the ratification of ILO Convention on 87 and recognize the representation of the migrant domestic workers organized in destination countries. Thank you so much. We are workers. We are deserve decent work as other workers in the world. Thank you so much.
I thank the distinguished delegates of IDWF, and the next on my list is distinguished representative of Korea Center for United Nations Human Rights Policy, to be followed by Pacific Migration Platform. You have the floor.
Good morning, I'm Sunju Park from South Korea. I'd like to address the issue of marriage migrant. South Korea has been one of the top destination countries for marriage migrant women from China, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Thailand, etc. From the year 2000 to 2023, around 440,000 foreign women married Korean men. During the same period, around 110,000 divorce cases were recorded, resulting in a divorce rate of about 26%. A significant number of these women married through brokerage agencies. The agency fee is mostly covered by the Korean husband, making the marriage process male-centric and creating a power imbalance. Moreover, the average duration of the marriage process through agency is just 9.3 days from their first meeting to the wedding. On average, the husband is 20 years older than the wife. These women come to Korea without knowing not only their husbands well, but also Korean society, language, culture, etc. This background places them in a highly vulnerable situation. After arriving in Korea, there are over 200 family centers nationwide where marriage migrants can receive necessary services. However, many face difficulties in accessing these services due to language barriers, geographical limitations, and the unfavorable attitudes of their husbands and in-laws. In addition, with a divorce rate of around 26%, it is presumed that a certain number of marriage migrants return to their home countries. They need to go divorce process again in their home countries, which is not easy for them. Moreover, in most cases, they are not alone. They are accompanied by their children who hold Korean nationality, yet they are likely to live in their mother's country as foreigners, facing difficulties in sustaining the children's legal status. However, there is no reliable data on returning marriage migrants and their children, nor are there proper reintegration services available. This leaves them trapped in the administrative blind spots of both governments. As you can see, marriage migrants, women need support throughout all stages of the migration pathway. At the pre-departure stage, there should be a human rights-based program in place. During their stay, social services should be easily accessible. At the return stage, a comprehensive reintegration program is necessary. Governments from both the country of origin and destination should cooperate to develop the necessary policies and programs to ensure the human rights of these marriage migrants and their children. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Korea Center for United Nations Human Rights Policy. Next on my list is the distinguished delegate of Pacific Migration Platform, to be followed by Building and Woodworkers International Asia Pacific. You have the floor.
Talofalava, aloha. Susanna Tiapula, with my allies, civil society, from the Pacific Migration Platform. I have served as a prosecutor in many jurisdictions in the Pacific for almost 2 decades. I have prosecuted cases of women held immigration holds, like 20 years old, and I've charged the cases where the prison guards raped them while they were in custody. I was part of an investigation of a Fijian domestic worker who was in the home of the #1 law enforcement official in that jurisdiction, caring for 10 children, a terminally ill father. She was never paid by that family. I was involved in a custody case where a woman from the Philippines with marriage migration was losing custody of her children. The only interpreter she was offered did not speak her language. She was offered a Tagalog interpreter as she lost custody of her children. She spoke Ilocano. I was part of the investigation, the prosecutor on the ground of Daiwusa, the textile factory, more than 200 workers who were being systematically starved, never paid. That factory sold goods in the United States. When the Department of Labor stepped in, I had full-grown adults who weighed 35 kilograms. 2 individuals died, a woman lost her eye. It was the first and is still the largest prosecution of human trafficking in the United States. I don't say these stories to present horror, but because our voices need to be heard. Pacific voices need to be present in these fora, and we ask you for the space to participate and to share strategies that we have created in working together. Thank you.
Thank you for the distinguished delegate of Pacific Migration Platform. I would now like to call on the distinguished representative of Building and Woodworkers International Asia Pacific, or BWI.
Excellencies, myself is Dr. Ramchandra Kuntia,
Chairman, Building and Woodworkers International Migrant Workers Committee, we assert that the Global Compact of Safe, Orderly, Regular Migration Compact will only be successful if it adheres to human and labor rights standards and does not further criminalize migrants or empower the private sector to dictate the term of migration governance. It is time for state to move beyond temporary or circular migration programs and put the focus on regularization, humanitarian resettlement, and policies that promote sustainable development and decent work for all in countries of origin, transit, destination of workers. Trade unions are setting the bar high. We will only accept compact that reflect these core demands. Collective workers' voice and participation, we demand a transparent, compact process that gives working families seat at the table and ensure our freedom to stand together and receive a fair return on our hard work. Freedom of association and right to collective bargaining. Migrants and refugees must be guaranteed full and equal rights and protection, including the rights to form and join a union and to collectively bargain for fair compensation and treatment. Freedom of association is an enabling right which shifts the power dynamic, enabling the workers to protect and advance their interests through collective actions as well as negotiations with employers. Without realizing that shift, we can never hope to reverse entrenched pattern of discrimination and exploitation against migrant workers, removing barriers to organizing a critical and defending excluded workers to all sorts, because union provides concrete mechanism to enforce labor standard and remedy disputes. The compact must be firmly based on the international human right as well as humanitarian and labor laws, requiring governments to commit, especially alleging their legislative framework with the relevant instrument. It must promote a ratification of ILO core conventions as well the migration specific conventions. The ILO should the lead UN agency on the governance of labor migration, as it has right-based constitutional mandate and expertise of labor. As Indians, we believe Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is, the world is one family. If we are belong to one family, why not the migrant workers with dignity, fairness, and right for every worker, anywhere, any worker, anywhere should get the same right, doing the same work, same ways, same dignity, same social security, and same facilities. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Building and Woodworkers International Asia Pacific, and that's the end of our list this morning. As I see no more speakers, I would like to again thank the moderator, the panelists, and all the delegates for their active participation today. The meeting has now concluded its deliberation under Agenda Item 3B on protecting migrants through right-based border governance, addressing objectives 4, 8 to 11, 13, and 21. We will continue with Agenda Item 3C this afternoon, and I would like to invite the Secretary of the meeting to make housekeeping announcements.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, during the lunch break today from 12:30 to 1:45, we have 5 parallel side events. Please refer to the ESCAP meeting website on the side event page for the full schedule and room information. Side events are being held in meeting rooms A, F, G, and H on level 1 and in conference room 4. Please enjoy your lunch and the side events. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. And I ask again all the delegates to return to this meeting room promptly after the break, as we will resume our deliberation again at 1400 sharp 2 p.m. sharp to ensure the most efficient use of the time allocated to the meeting. The meeting is adjourned, and enjoy your lunch.